Oh, hey there! Welcome back to the Game Dev Engineer Super Duper Study Sheet. Why did I name it that? I don't know. I thought it's a fun name. Do you think it's a fun name? And so today, what we're talking about is programming patterns. Nystrom, right? Uh, this guy who doesn't even code games, he just writes books these days. How many people just don't write code, right? They just teach, right? I don't know. Does it frustrate you? Sometimes it frustrates me. I think it's awesome, though, when somebody goes out and writes a book like Game Engine Architecture, right? No, as you probably... all right. Rants. We don't need rants. So these are programming patterns. And as stupid as it might sound, I've had interviews where people have just walked down the list of programming patterns and asked me to define them. So you need to be ready to do that, because I wasn't. I'm familiar with bridges and adapters, but the truth is, I have never made flashcards to study this stuff, and you really should, just to understand their applications. And really, what you want to be able to do is go down this list, and if they say, what is an abstract factory, you want to be able to explain it. Then you want, that's 1 point. 2 points, if you can then explain an example. I mean, you really need to be able to say an example of when this might be useful. It might, you get another point maybe if you could explain a limitation, a drawback, right? When would you want to use this versus another alternative approach? And then it'd be really useful if you could talk about an experience you had working with one of these systems. But, that's kind of stretching for some of these. Okay, so the patterns. I mean, I try to summarize it as concise as possible, right? I mean, when you look at these books where they originally came from, sometimes it takes way too long to explain it, right? Like, this is the proxy design pattern. Holy cow, that's a lot of information, right? And if you want the details, I linked them so you can check it out. However, for the vast majority of these cases, you're probably already familiar with something like a double buffer. 2 buffers, that's all it is. A current buffer and a next buffer, so that you're not, reading from the same one you're writing from, so that you don't have a screen tear. That's all there is, right? A game loop. Well, if you've worked in any game engine like Unity, then you're familiar with a game loop. This idea of going around and updating separate stuff. What's the difference between I guess the difference between a game loop and an update method, though I would say they're very similar, is with a game loop, that's when you're doing stuff like time.delta time. You want to have that abstraction from real time with respect to the game time. So that kind of stuff. And I don't think you really need me to go through every single one of these definitions here. Really just read them on your own and see if you can think of an example. And if you can't, then that's a great opportunity for you to do a little research and practice it. Now, frankly, some of these are a little more complicated than others. So you're going to see that some of them are one-liners, but some of them I just had a little bit of trouble squeezing them into one line, because I feel like an abstract factory is a bit of an abstract concept, and so it does take a few more lines to explain. But in general, none of these are too complicated that you shouldn't be able to sit down and figure out what the term is within an hour. Maybe 10 minutes, honestly. So take a moment, walk through this list, make sure you're familiar with all of them, so that if somebody on a phone interview has the audacity to say, hey, Bob, Bill, whatever your name is, what's the strategy pattern? You should have an answer for that. Even though you're obviously familiar with this pattern, you might not know the name strategy, and they might just ask you the exact name. Oh, everything has a period. All right. I'll put it back. All right, so that is the patterns. And so I have some other stuff in the guide here, like a queue implementation. I think it's important to get an idea for what that looks like. Many times, that's pretty common. They'll ask you to code a queue in front of them. I haven't really been asked about sorting too much, but I have heard that they might ask you to implement a quick sort by memory, which I think is honestly a stupid question, but they might ask you. Here are some review questions. So after the videos we watched that you watched of me, talking this nonsense, you should be able to answer all these questions without a problem. So this is a good little self-assessment if you want to figure out if you made any mistakes or if there's any gaps in your knowledge. Then there's some other stuff here, like just some random toy algorithms. So I got this question recently in an interview, and they said, how do you determine if a linked list has a loop? And it's one of those answers, right? It's you take 2 pointers, you walk them both forward, one's moving one step at a time, the other is moving 2 steps at a time. And then if A and B land on the same node, well, you've got a loop then. And if they both reach the end, then there's no loop. So that's sort of a curious algorithm, right? It's not something you could probably think of on the spot, but they're going to ask you a lot of stuff like that. I have been asked to write a randomizer before, and so I think it would be useful to memorize the Fisher-Yates algorithm. It's not very complicated, but it's a great way to get a truly random shuffler method if you need to shuffle a deck of cards or something. That was the application for this program. Determining if a string's a palindrome or if it has a palindrome substring. This is kind of minutia here. A few great books. Herb Sutter, he's got a lot of great talks online. Check him out. And then the rest of this guide here is just some to-do items, stuff I'm still working on, things I think might be worth adding to the guide, but I haven't quite figured out yet. And then, as always, if you have ideas for what I should add to this guide, maybe you went into an interview and you got an interview question that you just were not prepared for, and this guide did not help you with it, let me know. I'll add it to the guide. I really want you to be able to succeed on this interview, so anything I can do to help you, please let me know. Put it in the comment section. Send me an email. As always, happy to chat. And good luck on your interview. I really hope to see you getting that dream job, maybe hanging out at GDC, whatever it is. The world needs more great gameplay engineers. And if you're watching this video, then that could be you. Good luck.